All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. And hey, if you're catching the replay, welcome to you too. This is ZTNA Table Talks, and I'm Iksa Gerard from the marketing team at AppGate. Really glad you're here. Quick housekeeping before we jump in. We're recording this, so the replay will hit your inbox within 24 hours. Drop your questions in the Q&A panel anytime. We'll get to as many as we can live and follow up on the rest. If you'd like translated captions, please request that it be enabled on your menu panel. Today's conversation is part 2 of our direct routed ZTNA for OT series, Compliance Without Compromise, Securing OT Access for DoD and Highly Regulated Environments. If you joined us for part 1, you already know direct routed ZTNA changes the resilience story. Today, we're going deeper into what it means for compliance, data sovereignty, and the federal zero trust mandate. And I've got two of the best people at AppGate to walk us through it. Our panelists today, Walid Dimachki, Principal Product Manager, and David McBride, Federal Sales Engineer. With that, let's get started. David, over to you.
Thank you, Ixta. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. I'm David McBride, as she said, Federal Sales Engineer here at AppGate. And today we're going to be picking up right where we left off with part 2 of our ZTNA Table Talk series. As Ixta said, the theme for today's session is compliance without compromise. And if you're with us for part 1, you know we spent that time making the architectural case for a direct routed zero trust in OT environments. Today, we're going to bring that into the real world by walking through the compliance frameworks that are actually governing your decisions right now. I'll be handling the federal and DoD or DOW side of the house. So think CMMC, NIST, FedRAMP, and that DOW zero trust strategy we're all trying to meet by 2027 and 2030. And my colleague Walid will cover the broader regulated enterprise to do with international and commercial enterprise things. And with that, I'll hand it over to Walid to introduce himself and we'll get rolling.
Thank you, David. As David mentioned, I'm Walid Dimachki, Principal Product Manager at AppGate. My focus is primarily on OT, and I've been in the industry for quite some time. And just like David mentioned, today we're going to be talking about, a very important topic, which is compliance and auditing and those kinds of things. And for some people, it's a very favorite topic for them, and for others, they view it as a cost of doing business. So with that in mind, David, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Wally. We'll get rolling. So, for anyone who missed part 1, I'll kind of give you a 30-second version of what we talked about, what was discussed, a little bit of a recap. So, we made that case that cloud routed ZTNA, the kind where traffic hairpins out to a vendor cloud before it gets to your assets, fundamentally breaks for OT. Simply put, these air-gapped networks, bandwidth constrained backhauls, and headless PLCs don't fit that model. Direct routed ZTNA is the answer. The policy decision point, the enforcement gateway, the audit trail, all of it stays under your control. There's no third-party cloud sitting in the traffic path. We also covered single packet authorization, which means visible to unauthorized scanners, and we showed how third-party vendor access transforms from shared VPN credentials to named user, time-bound, fully audited sessions. That's the architecture, but today's question is, how does that architecture hold up when an auditor walks in the door? And before we get started, we'll start with a quick poll. So you should see a poll coming up on your screen right now. If you could take 5 seconds and just tell us where you're at. Give it about 20, 30 seconds. I think I see some results coming in here.
Yeah, I'm going to leave it for about 15 more seconds.
Wonderful.
And then we'll show the results.
Okay. Yep. I've got the results here. All right. Deployed, not started. Okay. So pretty wide spectrum. Very, very helpful context. And Today's discussion, we're going to talk about why compliance is forcing this conversation, whether you're ready or you're not. And based on that poll, everybody's kind of scattered across. So here's the framing I want you to take away from this slide. For regulated OT, zero trust is no longer a strategy paper. It is an audit obligation. And I want to make that very clear. On the federal side, and this is my world, Walid will cover the rest, but you've got the DoD or DOW now, zero strategy or zero trust strategy. And this is comprised of 91 target controls and 61 advanced controls mapped across 7 pillars. You've got CMMC 2.0, phase 2, where C3PAO assessments become mandatory on November 10th of this year, so 2026. That's about 6 months from right now. And you've got NIST SP 800-171 controls, which flowed down from DFARS, which means you're in this defense industrial base. This isn't optional. This is going to happen November 10th, and it's in our faces. And one of the reasons we're doing this webinar is to get it out there as soon as possible and make sure that everyone that we're working with from a partner standpoint is ready to go or a customer standpoint is ready to go. And I'm going to pause here. Walid, do you want to pick up for the energy and industrial side of things?
Absolutely. And just like we covered in our first webinar, when we're talking about energy and bulk electric systems, we're talking absolutely about the NERC CIP framework and set of requirements. And that not only covers CIP 15, which is INSM, which is a really big buzzword these days, but it also covers other NERC CIP requirements. We know about 5, 8, 9, 10. There's a lot of them, and they all carry different implications for those asset owners, for those critical infrastructure and utility companies, because it does require them to provide evidence of compliance. And sometimes the violation for a given compliance requirement is very costly. And a lot of these audits, sometimes they run for a long period of time. Similarly, we're looking at NIST CSF 2.0, ISO 27001. Those are all frameworks. Some of them might not necessarily be a compliance framework, but they're absolutely things that need to be in place in order to keep those businesses and those OT environments running smoothly.
Awesome. Thanks, Walid. And one thing I want to mention here's the thing that cuts across all of these frameworks, whether you're a DIB, whether you're on the federal side, or anything that Walid just covered, and that is the auditor. Regardless of which acronym they're carrying, they're going to want exactly 3 things: who accessed what, when, and where that evidence now lives. That's it. That's the audit in 3 questions. And we'll talk to that here in a bit. So I'm going to take the federal column here, and then I'll hand it off to Walid for his piece. But on the federal and DOW side, like I said before, you're dealing with a few distinct layers. At the top is the DoD zero trust strategy, those 152 controls, 91 target again, and 61 advanced controls across 7 pillars. CISA has their own zero trust maturity model with 5 pillars, and there's meaningful but imperfect overlap there. So if you're supporting both a DoD and a civilian agency, you need to understand both mappings. The CMMC 2.0 breaks into 3 levels. Level 1 is kind of your basic cyber hygiene, which is kind of self-assessed or is self-assessed. Level 2 is the one most DIB contractors live at. It requires third-party C3PAO assessments and phase 2 enforcements starting, like I said earlier, in this year in November 10th. And then you've got level 3, which is for programs handling CUI that's especially sensitive, and government-led assessments only are required for level 3. Moving on into NIST, you've got NIST SP 800-171 is the controls catalog that flows down from, or through, I should say, DFARS, clause 252.204-7012. That's a mouthful, but I got through it. And sitting underneath that umbrella, you've got 800-53 for federal systems, 800-37 for risk management, and 800-82 for ICS and OT specifically. These aren't separate programs, they're layered on top of each other. So when you think about the layers, you're going to now get into that NIST SP 800-207, which is the Zero Trust Architecture Reference Model. This is your architectural North Star for how ZT is supposed to be implemented in the federal context. And then finally and separately, you've got FedRAMP. Or for on-prem direct routed deployments, there's a FedRAMP exemption path, which is an ATO package. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we get to the data sovereignty page. Walid?
Yeah, and if you thought there were, enough acronyms that David just covered, guess what? There are a little bit more that we have to deal with on the commercial side. And we already went through them in the previous slide, but those are, these are not just requirements for the asset owner. So there are certain things that the asset owner is subject to, a regulation, a compliance requirement, or a framework that they have to operate within. But some of these also apply to the vendor that you have chosen to be able to maintain or be able to achieve some of those requirements. So some of these actually cover the vendor and what their systems are also subject to. So those are things that we want to make sure everyone is aware that, yes, you are going to be subject to an audit, you might be subject to compliance requirements. So make sure that when you are choosing a solution for yourself, you're also making sure that the vendor that you've chosen can help you provide the evidence for that audit, can help you provide evidence to maintain compliance within the different frameworks. I'll take as an example, IEC 62443. This one actually impacts the vendors more than it actually impacts the asset owner. Whereas with NERC CIP, there's a lot more onus on the asset owners, but there are also some requirements that apply to the vendor. The vendor needs to be able to provide the evidence that will be used as part of that audit. David?
Perfect. Thank you. So now that we understand the frameworks, we'll do a second poll here, which frameworks matter most to your organization. So we'll kind of do like we did on the last one, take a few seconds here and get some results.
I'll leave it up for about 10 more seconds and then share the
Okay.
results.
Okay. Interesting. So still pretty widespread, but a little heavier on the DOW side of the house today. This actually maps really well to how we've structured the next two slides. So Walid and I will each kind of walk you through one lens as we move forward here. Starting with myself. So this one is mine. Let me yeah. Let me walk through exactly how direct routed ZTNA architecture maps to the federal control families. So starting with the DoD zero trust pillars, you've got user, you've got device, network environment, application and workload, data, and visibility and analytics. And lastly, the automation and orchestration one. Direct routed ZTNA is not a point solution. I want to be very clear about that. It will touch all 7 of these pillars, but not cover one of these pillars holistically. The user gets continuously verified through identity in that pillar. And then for device, we're moving on. Every device is known and compliant before it connects to the network. As we get to the third pillar, which is network, the network is segmented with enforcement at the gateway. Access is scoped to specific applications, not broad network segments. And then data stays protected and within your custody. Every session generates telemetry, and that feeds your analytics pipeline. And policy enforcement and session revocation can be automated. So that's kind of a paragraph or a slew of information that kind of walks you or traverses you across all 7 pillars. So as we move from the DoD ZT mapping, I'll kind of briefly talk to the ZTMM, the CISA variant of this structure. And that is more of an implementation methodology or framework. It walks you through each one of the controls, but in a phased approach. And that's kind of what you're going to see in the federal civilian space. So think Department of Energy, think Department of Homeland Security, Department of Treasury, things of that nature, where what we just discussed with the 7 pillars is more of your DOW entities, U.S. Army, Coast Guard, U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, things like that, right? But moving on into CMMC, so now CMMC 2.0 control families, these are mapped directly. They're not holistic overarching methodologies. These map directly. So think access control is your least privileged named accounts, time-bound sessions, and that's the core of how direct routed ZTNA works. And then you go into identification and authentication. Some know it as IA. Things like MFA need to be enforced on every session, every vendor, every contractor, and every user. Moving on, we go to audit and accountability piece, referred to across the industry as AU. It's one timestamp record per session, evidence preserved in your SIM and not the vendor's cloud, things like that. And then you've got system and communications protection, or some know it as SC, but holistically, it's your FIPS 140-3 validation. So the cryptography on both the client and the gateway, if you look at it through the AppGate lens. And I want to put a pin in that November 10th date again here. So this is the third time I'm bringing it up. I know I'm redundant, but that phase 2 C3 PAO assessment will begin about 6 months from now. And if you are a DIB, like I said, and you haven't started your CMMC readiness work, this is the session where you should start thinking about it pretty seriously. The question your C3 PAO is going to ask is whether you can demonstrate these control mappings with evidence. Evidence being the key word there. Direct routed ZTNA gives you that evidence by design. To talk more about the commercial enterprise and the international variant of what I just covered, I'll move on to the next slide and I'll let Walid take over for a minute.
Sure. Thank you, David. So as we mentioned before, we're looking at these different standards, the different requirements and compliance frameworks. So I know that from the poll, we didn't have as many NERC CIP folks who are subject to that. But let's just take that one as an example. We look at certain things like NIST CSF 2.0. We have to identify, protect, respond, and recover. Basically, everything that is related to the session itself. And those are things that, again, the customer is subject to, or the asset owner is subject to, as well as the vendor who is providing that accessibility is also subject to as well in terms of providing the evidence. NERC CIP 5 is a great example where the ESP, or the electronic security perimeter, it is enforcing access at the OT DMZ level. If you guys are familiar with the Purdue model within OT, we're looking at level 3.5, which is exactly the boundary between the IT level and the rest of the OT network. CIP 7 is another example where we have to keep track of user access and have the ability to perform audits on the sessions themselves and who logged in and who did not log in, who had a successful login, who had an unsuccessful login. CIP 11, again, is another one where we're protecting the bulk collector system, I'm always going to mess up that acronym, BCSI data, and being able to protect that, making sure that always is encrypted and we're not necessarily leaking out unencrypted information. And so we look at also on the other side where we have some EU standards and regulations like NIS2 and DORA. We have some international standards. Again, we mentioned 62443 and ISO 27001. Those are, again, things where the requirements play both ways, both on the asset owner as well as on the vendor and the provider of that information. So with that in mind, we always have to keep track of, can we provide the evidence? Is it available? Or does the asset owner need to have a separate workflow to provide the evidence? So the balance between vendor and asset owner needs to be well understood, so that even if you are providing, even if a vendor is providing a solution, there has to be clarity very early on as to what are the expectations from an auditability standpoint. Can this vendor software or vendor solution provide the evidence? Or if that is not the case, how does the asset owner, how are they expected to provide that evidence? So there's that collaboration that needs to happen. And I saw there was a question that came in about CIP 15 specifically, with something that requires, passive network monitoring. How does ZTNA come into play with that? That's an excellent question, because with Zero Trust Network access, we're governing who accesses the network, when, what are they accessing, during which time. Passive network monitoring might not necessarily have all of the context around that access. So it's very important when you're choosing these vendors to choose vendors that can actually even integrate with one another so that we can provide that context over to the NDR system. So these are the types of solutions without getting into a sales pitch where, again, you have to be very careful about your vendor selection.
Yep. Thank you. We're going to move on here to data sovereignty. And if you remember, I put emphasis earlier when I talked about, we'll get to it at data sovereignty about ATO packages, FedRAMP, and things like that. And this slide is the one I get asked about the most in almost all of my federal conversations, especially when I'm talking to folks working on ATOs or maybe trying to navigate or circumnavigate the FedRAMP process. And that is the auditor's question is just always the same. No matter what framework they're operating under, it's where is the evidence and who can touch it? Evidence, evidence, evidence. With a direct routed ZTNA, the answer is pretty clean. Identities live in your directory, your IDP, your conditional access policy, federated to no one outside your control plane. Policy lives on the controller you deploy and operate. And audit logs, audit logs. They need to be written directly to your SIM, retained on your schedule, and never commingled with another tenant's data. So for federal environments, this matters enormously. If you're pursuing an ATO, the system boundary has to be defensible. You can't have your session logs living in a shared SaaS tenant. If you've got a FedRAMP exemption path for an on-prem deployment, this architecture does support it. And for the CMMC scope boundary conversation, being able to point to where your audit and accountability controls evidence lives is absolutely essential. It's actually a requirement. So with all of that in mind, and that's a lot to ingest what we've covered so far, I do want to stop here briefly. Walid, the NIST 2 EU data residency angle is relevant here too. Do you want to maybe add a little bit before we move on to the next?
I think just for the interest of time, I know we're getting close to the 30-minute mark. Let's just skip that one for now and move on
Okay.
to the next topic.
Okay, that's totally fine. All right. So this is really about the before and after. And in the federal environments, the before is a compliance nightmare that most organizations are still living in. The problem today with shared VPN access or a similar legacy access solution is there is no individual accountability. Let's say a contractor logs in through a shared credential. Your AU controls are immediately broken. You can't produce an audit trail that says which specific person accessed which specific asset at which specific time. And that is a finding. Then add broad network reach. Once authenticated, your least privilege access controls are now violated by default. Access that persists past the maintenance window means you've got orphaned entitlements beginning to accumulate. And logs scattered across VPN appliances or jump servers or maybe even firewalls. That means there's no single evidentiary record when the auditor does come looking, and they will come looking. And then there's the cleared and non-cleared contractor problem. In a lot of OT environments, you've got cleared personnel, and then you have non-cleared vendors sharing the same access path to an OT system or to any system for that matter on your network. And that's a problem that goes beyond CMMC. It touches personnel security and program protection. Here's what the compliance posture should look like with the direct routed ZTNA. It should be named user identity with MFA on every session. Your IA controls are met. Entitlement is scoped to specific assets only. There is no lateral reach. AC controls are met. The access expires automatically when the maintenance window closes. So now you have no more orphaned entitlements. and that audit log is defensible. So now you have a one timestamp session record per access written to your SIM. Your AU controls are met by design, and cleared and non-cleared contractors enter through separate policy controlled paths. It's very important for them to be separate, but also policy controlled. That last point, like I said, is significant. You can define separate entitlement sets for cleared versus non-cleared personnel, enforced at the policy layer with separate audit trails. That's the kind of control that makes DISA review go very smoothly, and those auditors become very happy when they walk into your organization. And that's all I have for that slide. And before we open it up here for questions, I know we're pressed on time. I want to touch on AppGate's credentials in this space very quickly, because I know this comes up, especially in a federal procurement. But AppGate does hold its common criteria EAL2+, which is an independent third-party security evaluation. We have our FIPS 140-3 validated cryptography on both the client and the gateway. We recently received our NIAP protection profile certification on AppGate Client 6.4, and we have a SOC 2 Type 2, which is an independent audit of our management plane. One final note in line with certifications would be our CNAP implementation for our Platform One client, which is the DoD DevSecOps platform. For those that don't know, CNAP, by the way, is Cloud Native Access Point. So with all of this in mind that we've discussed today, if you want to revisit some of this information we've covered, we've got 2 sites. We'll post them on that follow-up email. But if you're taking notes now for any kind of mapping documentation, white papers, ATO packages, visit appgate.com/resources. And if you're looking for our full list of certifications, visit appgate.com/certifications. All right, let's go to the questions. Drop whatever you got in the chat, and we'll work through as many as we can.
Sounds good. Thank you, David. We have a couple of questions that came in. This one seems to be for Walid. A lot of us on the OT side have spent years basically being treated as a subset of IT, and resilience conversations get framed that way too. How have you seen teams start to shift that internally? Or does that conversation even begin without it turning into a turf war?
No, that's a great question. I want folks who are on the call to really internalize the fact that OT is not old IT in that sense. OT has a very different set of requirements. It is very much focused on uptime and resiliency as a first-class priority. Unlike with IT, where security is absolutely the top priority, in OT, making sure that the operation is still running without any issues and it's optimized is the primary concern. Obviously, the way to degrade that would be through security. And so that's kind of where this shift in thinking really needs to take place with different vendors out there and even different teams working within larger organizations where there is that IT-OT convergence. And sometimes the folks in the IT department are helping out implement certain security best practices on the OT side. There always has to be this recognition that IT security cannot get in the way of operations. So it has to be even more invisible to OT operations when we are implementing cybersecurity. So think of things like MFA that might not necessarily always be available within an OT environment. So when we are making it available, we have to take into account things like MFA cannot be cloud-based. It has to be something that is on-prem potentially because we are air-gapped. So these are some of the considerations that people need to take into account, both within the organization, but also within vendors who are servicing those organizations.
Thank you, Walid. This one seems to be for David. There's a lot of acronym soup in this space: FIPS, Common Criteria, NIAP, Platform One. The list goes on. If you were sitting on our side of the table evaluating vendors right now, which of those certifications would you genuinely push on, and which are more table stakes?
Well, okay, so I'll be pretty direct here. FIPS 140-3 and NIAP. That's what I would push with a couple of caveats though. So You need to push them the right way, those two, right? So don't just accept maybe just a FIPS compliant. Actually ask for that, I think it's CMVP certificate number, and confirm that it covers the module in your actual traffic path. And then the caveat for NIAP, the protection profile, ask which protection profile the evaluation was against, not just the EAL level, right? So I think we're talking about direct routed, so there is difference in deployment models and architectures. And if you aren't a direct routed vendor, or you might be building out some kind of cloud suite of tools, FedRAMP would be another one that is a must, especially in the federal space. And again, FedRAMP really depends, or ATO package for that instance, depends on your deployment model and your architecture. They're kind of one and the same. Some have more reachability in different organizations, but those would be kind of the three, right? That FIPS for cryptography, the NIAP protection profile, and FedRAMP or ATO package if you need that. And then the one that we mentioned earlier that's in this question is the SOC 2 Type 2. Um, that pretty much falls under what you add the table stakes umbrella. I say that because almost everyone at this point kind of has it. The absence is definitely a red flag, but the presence isn't necessarily a differentiator, if that, if that makes sense. So they're going to notice it's not there, but if you have it, it's not going to differentiate your functionality or capabilities. That's how I'd answer that. Yeah.
Thank you, David. I think we don't have any more questions. I think we can close it up. So, David, Walid, thank you. I appreciate you both sharing the time and the expertise today. And to everyone who joined live, thank you for being here and for the great questions. The recording will land in your inbox tomorrow. And one small ask before you go, a short survey will pop up when you close out. It takes a minute and it genuinely shapes what we do with future table talks. If you'd like someone from our team to reach out with more info, just flag it in the survey and we'll be in touch. Thanks again, and until next time.
Thanks, everybody.